Eli Witherby sat by the dying fire, a chipped cup of coffee cooling beside him. Outside, the storm clawed at the windows of his small Arizona ranch, the wind shrieking across the flat plains like a wounded animal. Rain hammered the tin roof and thunder rolled over the hills, shaking loose dust from the rafters. The horses were restless in the barn. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yelped and went silent. Then came the sound, a pounding, desperate, heavy knocking against the front door. 3 quick blows, then silence. Eli froze, his hand hovering over the old double-barrel shotgun resting by the wall. Nobody came out here this late, not unless they carried trouble or needed saving. He rose slowly, boots scraping the floorboards, heart thudding like the storm outside. The knocking came again, harder this time. "For God's sake," he muttered, cocking the gun. He lifted the lantern, its flames sputtering in the draft, and pulled open the door. Lightning flared across the yard, white and blinding, revealing a small figure on the porch, a young girl soaked to the bone, wrapped in a torn blanket. Her face was brown from the desert sun, her black hair plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes, fierce, terrified, pleading. "Please," she gasped, voice trembling. "They're coming. They'll kill me." For a second, Eli thought he'd seen a ghost. She was Apache and too young to be out here alone. Behind her, far out across the darkened plain, he saw the faint glow of torches bobbing through the storm, moving fast. He clenched his jaw. "Who's after you?" She shook her head, rain dripping from her lashes. "Please," she said again. "Just one night, please." Eli's chest tightened. The last time he'd opened his door to a stranger, his wife had ended up dead, caught between him and the men who came looking for blood. He'd vowed never again to take sides, never again to draw his gun for anyone. But the girl's eyes were the kind that tore right through a man's defenses, eyes that had already seen too much death. He stepped back, lowering the shotgun. "Get inside, quick." She stumbled through the doorway, dripping water onto the wood floor. He bolted the door behind her. The sound of distant hoofbeats thundered closer through the rain. "Sit by the fire," he said, pulling an old wool blanket off the chair. "You're half frozen." She hesitated before taking it, her hands shaking as she clutched the fabric around her shoulders. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl didn't answer. She kept glancing toward the window, toward the glow moving closer through the dark. Eli crossed the room and blew out the lantern. "Keep quiet." A minute later, torchlight spilled across his front yard. The sound of horses filled the air, hooves sinking into the mud. Then came the voice, cold, familiar, soaked in cruelty. "Eli Witherby." Eli's gut tightened. He knew that voice. Cray Boone, deputy of Cochise County, a man who'd worn a badge like a shield for his sins. Eli opened the door just a crack. Rain slashed sideways, the torches casting warped shadows. Boone sat astride his horse in a long black duster, hat pulled low, his men spread out behind him like a pack of wolves. "Evenin', Boone," Eli called. Boone's smile was thin and sharp. "Evenin'. You seen anyone come through here tonight?" Eli kept his tone flat. "Ain't seen no one." Boone's gaze shifted past him into the house, where faint firelight flickered on the walls. "We're looking for a girl," he said. "Apache, stole from the cavalry camp. I'd be armed." Eli raised an eyebrow. "Can't say I've seen any girls around here, armed or otherwise." Boone leaned forward in his saddle, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You lie to me, Witherby, and I'll have this place burned to the ground before dawn. You understand me?" Eli didn't blink. "I do." For a long, heavy moment, only the storm spoke between them. Boone finally pulled on his reins. "Keep your eyes open. She's dangerous." The torches began to move away, swallowed by the curtain of rain. Eli shut the door and stood still, listening until the hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did he turn toward the fire. The girl was sitting by the hearth, shivering. In her lap, wrapped in a piece of torn cloth, was something silver that caught the firelight. Eli crouched beside her. "What's that you're holding, miss?" She hesitated, then unwrapped it slowly. Inside the cloth lay a cavalry badge, tarnished and stained with dried blood. Eli stared at it. "Where'd you get that?" The girl met his eyes. "From the man they killed," she whispered. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the house to its bones. Eli looked again at the badge, at the blood, the bent metal, the faint engraving along the edge, and felt something old and bitter stir in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he opened that door, his quiet life had ended, and before the next storm passed, every lie this land had buried would come clawing back to the surface. Dawn crept over the horizon slow and bruised, its pale light breaking through the rain clouds that still hung low over the plains. Steam rose from the wet earth as the storm passed, leaving the Witherby Ranch silent except for the soft hiss of wind through the dry grass. Eli sat at his small kitchen table, shoulders hunched, staring into the black swirl of his coffee. The girl sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket far too big for her, hands cupped around the tin mug he'd given her. Her dark eyes never left the fire. The night had been long, filled with the groan of thunder and the ghostly memory of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Eli hadn't slept. He just sat, listening to her breathing, waiting for her to speak. Now as the gray light touched her face, she finally did. "My name is Nayeli," she said softly. Her voice trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. "My father was a scout. He rode with the U.S. Army for 5 years." Eli looked up, his jaw tightening. "Army, huh? Not many scouts left these days," she nodded. "He helped them find trails through the hills, taught them where the water was, how to read the sky. He believed if he helped them, maybe they'd let our people keep what little land was left." Her gaze drifted to the window. He was wrong. Eli said nothing. The fire popped between them, spitting sparks. "They used him," she continued. "Deputy Boone came with soldiers, promised my father fair pay if he guided them through Apache land to a silver mine. But when they found what they wanted, they called him a thief. Boone shot him, said it was justice. Then they buried him in a ditch and took his badge to claim he'd been a deserter." She reached for the blood-stained badge on the table, the metal catching the dull morning light. "That badge belonged to my father. He earned it for saving Boone's life once. Boone kept it as a trophy." Eli's hand tightened around his cup until the metal groaned. He remembered Boone back in the Indian Wars. Young, vicious, always laughing after the killing stopped. A man who enjoyed the smell of smoke and fear. "You're saying Boone killed a scout?" Eli asked quietly. Nayeli's eyes lifted to his, steady now. "No, Boone killed my father." The words hit like a rifle shot in the still room. Eli leaned back, the chair creaking. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. "If that's true," he said, "and you're carrying proof, Boone won't rest till you're dead." "I know," she said. "That's why I came here. He's hunting me because I ran with this badge. There's a federal inspector coming to Fort Redding. If I reach him, he'll hear my story. He'll see the truth." Eli rubbed a hand down his face. Fort Redding was near 70 miles north, rough country between here and there. "You'd never make it alone," he muttered. "I wasn't alone," she said softly. "But they caught the others." Eli stood pacing to the window. Outside, the plains stretched gold and endless, broken only by the black line of distant hills. Helping her meant hanging his own noose. The law didn't forgive a man for siding with an Apache. Not in this country. Not under Boone's watch. But as the wind whistled through the cracks in the wall, Eli could almost hear her again. His wife's voice, soft as a prayer. From that night years ago when Boone's bullets found her. "Don't turn away from the truth again, Eli. Don't let it rot in the dark." He turned back to Nayeli. "All right," he said finally. "We'll ride at dusk. I know back trails Boone's men won't think to watch. You get to Fort Redding, you tell that inspector what happened. But once we go, there's no turning back." Nayeli looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then I'll ride." Eli poured another cup of coffee and stared into the fire. The decision settled heavy in his chest, but beneath the weight was something else, purpose, cold and sharp. He hadn't felt it in years. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of hoofbeats. Eli stiffened and stepped to the window. Through the dawn mist, he saw a lone rider approaching down the muddy trail, his ranch hand Mason back earlier than expected. Mason swung down from his horse near the barn and froze. His eyes caught on the wet earth by the stable door, 2 sets of footprints, one small, one large, leading from the house to the barn. He stared at them for a long time. Then his hand drifted slowly toward the pistol at his hip. The sun burned mercilessly above the plains, turning the horizon into a wavering sea of heat. By midday, the air itself seemed to shimmer, and the leather of Eli's reins felt hot enough to scorch his palms. He and Nayeli rode side by side, their horses kicking up pale dust as they crossed the edge of Dead Canyon, a place folks whispered about, a jagged maze of cliffs and dry riverbeds where light went to die before it reached the ground. The land here was older than sin, Towering red walls rose like fortress ramparts on both sides, wind-carved and cracked. The silence was almost sacred, broken only by the scrape of hooves on stone and the rasp of Eli's breath. Every shadow felt alive. Every echo carried the memory of gunfire. Nayeli rode with her back straight, her eyes scanning the ridges. "My father used to bring me through here," she said quietly. "Said this canyon doesn't forgive liars. You speak truth here or the desert swallows you." Eli grunted. "Wise man." "He said a man's worth is in the truth he stands for," she added after a pause, "not the land he owns." The words hit him harder than the heat. He turned away, pretending to check the horizon, but he could still hear his wife's voice in his head. That same truth whispered on her dying breath after Boone's bullets tore through her. Don't let lies live longer than justice. He swallowed hard, gripping the reins until his knuckles went white. "Your father sounds like he knew what mattered." Nayeli looked at him then. "You did too once." "I can see it," Eli's jaw tightened. "Maybe. But I buried it same time I buried her." They rode in silence for a while, the wind carrying the smell of dry sage and old bones. Above them, vultures circled lazily, black wings gliding across a white sky. The canyon narrowed until the walls almost touched, forcing them to ride single file. Eli led the way, his hand resting on the shotgun slung over his saddle. Behind them, miles back, Mason's horse kicked up faint dust trails as he followed their path. He kept low, face pale with guilt, eyes darting from the cliffs to the horizon. He'd told Boone he didn't know anything about the girl, but Boone had known he was lying. Boone always knew. So Mason had agreed to follow, to mark the trail with bits of white cloth tied to brush along the canyon's edge. He told himself it was just for protection, just in case. But deep down, he knew he was leading the devil right to them. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low enough to throw long shadows down the rock walls. The heat gave way to chill, the air thick with the smell of dust and iron. Eli slowed his horse at a dry creek bed, the cracked earth littered with bones of long-dead cattle. "We'll camp here," he said. "No fire till dark." Nayeli nodded and began unsaddling her horse. Her hands moved with quiet precision as though she'd done this her whole life. When the first stars blinked through the purple sky, Eli finally struck a small fire, just enough to warm the tin coffee pot. The flames flickered against the canyon walls, painting their faces in gold and shadow. For the first time, Eli spoke of the past he'd buried. "Boone was my partner once. Before the wars ended, we rode for the same company, ran patrols through Apache land. He liked the killing too much, said it made him feel alive. I quit after my wife, after she got caught in the crossfire. I couldn't prove it, but Boone was there. He pulled the trigger that day." Nayeli's gaze didn't waver. "Then you know what he is." "I know," Eli said softly. "I just never had proof." She held up the blood-stained badge, letting the firelight dance across the metal. "Now you do." He stared at it a long while. The emblem gleamed dully, warped by heat and stained with dried red. "This badge once meant honor," she murmured. "Now it's just a lie." Eli looked at her across the fire, the reflection of the flames flickering in his eyes. "Then we'll make it mean something again." The night deepened. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the cliffs, their cries rising and fading like restless spirits. Eli stood and poured dirt over the fire, smothering the glow. The stars above burned sharp and cold. "Get some rest," he said. "We ride at first light." Nayeli curled beneath her blanket, the badge clutched to her chest. Eli leaned against a rock, shotgun across his lap, eyes half closed but mind sharp. And somewhere beyond the canyon mouth, a single torch flickered in the darkness. Then another, and another. The faint rhythm of hooves echoed through the night, drawing closer. Boone's men had found the trail. At their head rode Mason, face pale in the torchlight, torn between shame and survival, leading them straight into Dead Canyon. The abandoned mission rose from the dust like a ghost's memory, its white stone walls cracked and sun-eaten, its roof half collapsed. The old bell tower leaned to one side, the rusted cross above it hanging by a single nail. Eli Witherby led the horses into the courtyard, every step echoing in the dead air. Dusk had settled heavy and red over the land, painting the mission in the color of old blood. "We'll rest here till dark," he said, voice low. Nayeli nodded, her face drawn and pale from exhaustion. Her horse trembled beneath her, sides heaving from the long ride. They'd been running since dawn. through ravines and across dry creeks, always one ridge ahead of Boone's men. Now there was nowhere left to run. Inside the mission, the air smelled of dust and rot. Torn hymn books lay scattered across the floor. A broken statue of the Virgin leaned in the corner, one eye missing, hands clasped forever in prayer. Eli dropped his pack near the altar. "You keep that badge close," he said. "It's our only truth left." Nayli looked down at the silver badge, the blood on it long dried. "Truth doesn't stop bullets," she said. He gave a grim smile. "No, but it gives 'em meaning." Outside, a horse whinnied. Then came the crunch of boots. More than one pair. Eli froze. The sound of spurs followed. Slow, deliberate, circling the courtyard. He moved to the window, peering through the cracked frame. Torches glowed beyond the archway. Boone's men. Maybe 6 of them. The first to appear was Mason, riding stiff, his face tight with guilt. Behind him came Boone, his long duster snapping in the wind, his revolver low at his hip. Eli's stomach turned to ice. He could feel Nayli stiffen behind him. Boone called out, voice booming in the hollow ruin.
"Eli Witherby."
"You got yourself lost in church, old man?" His laughter echoed through the stone like a devil's hymn. "Didn't think you'd break your peace for a savage. Guess guilt makes fools of us all." Eli stepped into the doorway, shotgun resting against his shoulder. "You talk too much for a man who hides behind torches." Boone grinned, spitting into the dirt. "Tell you what. You come out peaceful-like and maybe I let the girl live. She's wanted for murder, you know. Best you hand her over before the army hangs you both." Eli's eyes didn't waver. "You got my word, Boone, I'll come quiet." "Just let her walk," Boone raised a brow. "You always were sentimental." He looked to Mason. "Tie 'em both." Mason dismounted, rope in hand. His hands shook as he looked between Eli and Nayeli. The girl's voice cut through the air, sharp and defiant. "He killed my father. You think he'll let us live once we're tied? He'll kill us all." Boone's grin slipped. "That mouth of yours is gonna get you buried next to him, girl." He drew his revolver, the steel glinting in the dying light. Eli didn't move. His eyes locked on Mason. Then, with a sudden motion, he reached into his coat and hurled the badge. It clattered across the dirt and landed at Mason's boots, spinning once before it stilled. "Go ahead, son," Eli said quietly. "Pick it up. Tell me what kind of man you're following." Mason looked down. The firelight caught the metal. The cavalry star, dented and red with old blood. He crouched, hesitating, then turned it over in his hand. On the back, engraved letters glimmered faintly in the torchlight. S.N.E., Scout, 7th Cavalry. His breath caught. He remembered that name. The Apache who saved their patrol 3 years ago, the one Boone had called a thief before putting a bullet in his chest. Boone saw it in Mason's eyes, that flicker of realization, of disgust. "Don't you listen to him," Boone barked. "He's lying. That badge is stolen." Mason lifted his rifle, slowly, deliberately. "Don't," Boone warned, stepping back, eyes narrowing, but the rifle was already turning. The silence before the first shot was thick enough to choke on. Then thunder split it open. Gunfire erupted in the courtyard, echoing off the stone walls like war drums. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Smoke filled the mission's entrance as bullets ripped through the air. Eli dove behind a column, returning fire with both barrels. One of Boone's men fell screaming into the dust. Nayeli grabbed Mason's revolver from his dropped belt and fired toward the gate, her hands trembling but sure. Boone fired back, the muzzle flash lighting his sneer. A bullet tore into Eli's shoulder, spinning him back against the wall. He grunted but stayed on his feet, blood soaking his shirt. "Old fool," Boone spat, reloading behind a fallen beam. "You could have died quiet." "Still might," Eli rasped. "But not on your terms." He staggered to the altar, bracing his arm on the wood. Smoke curled through the broken roof, turning the sunset into a red haze. Nayeli fired again and another man dropped. Mason caught one in the leg but crawled to cover, gritting his teeth. Then came silence. Only the crackle of burning torches. Boone's shadow moved against the far wall, pistol drawn. He aimed toward Nayeli, but Eli was faster. His shotgun roared, splintering the beam above Boone's head. Wood and dust rained down. Boone cursed and bolted through the side doorway, blood trailing from his arm. Eli stumbled after him, calling out through clenched teeth. "Boone!" Outside, Boone swung into his saddle, one arm hanging useless at his side. He glared back once, hatred burning bright. "You think you've won, Witherby? By the time you crawl to that fort, I'll have your neck in a noose." He spurred his horse, vanishing into the gathering dark. Eli collapsed to his knees, breath ragged. Nayeli rushed to him, pressing a hand to his wound. He looked up at her through the smoke. "He's heading for Fort Redding," he gasped. "If he gets there first," she nodded, eyes fierce. "Then we'll have to ride faster." In the distance, the faint thunder of Boone's horse faded into the hills, swallowed by the night. The old mission stood silent again, its broken bell swaying gently in the wind, tolling for the dead and for the reckoning still to come. The first light of dawn crept over Fort Redding like a slow confession. The air was thin, sharp with the scent of dust and gun oil. Men gathered in the square, miners, soldiers, traders, all drawn by the promise of spectacle. At the center stood Deputy Cray Boone, his arm bound in a blood-stained sling, his face pale with fury. The bandage across his shoulder was fresh, but his lies were older than anyone could count. He stood before the federal inspector, a thin man in a gray coat who looked tired of travel and truth alike. Boone's voice carried over the murmuring crowd. "It was an Apache attack, sir. Savage ambush in Dead Canyon. We tracked the girl, but she'd already turned the rancher against us. Witherby shot my men and fled. I tried to bring him in alive." The inspector adjusted his spectacles, studying Boone with quiet suspicion. "And the girl?" Boone's lips curled. "Dead, I reckon. These people don't last long in the wild. The rancher too, soon enough." They made their choice. The crowd shifted uneasily. They'd heard whispers about the fire in the hills, the gunshots at the mission. But Boone's badge still gleamed on his chest, and most men feared the kind of power it carried. Then, from the far end of the street, came the sound of hooves. Slow, steady, heavy. Every head turned. Eli Witherby rode into the square, his coat torn, his shoulder bandaged in dried blood. Behind him came Mason, pale and silent, and Nayeli, her face streaked with dust but her gaze unbroken. The crowd parted like a tide. Boone's eyes widened, disbelief, then rage. "Well, I'll be damned," he hissed. "The dead do walk." Eli dismounted slowly, boots crunching in the dirt. He said nothing. His shotgun hung across his saddle, but the weight in his stare was heavier than any weapon. Nayeli stepped forward, holding something in both hands, a folded piece of paper and the silver badge, still dark with her father's blood. She stood in the rising sunlight, her voice clear and calm. "My father was your scout," she said, every word sharp as a blade. "He died wearing your orders. You called him a thief and shot him for what he wouldn't steal." Boone started to speak, but the inspector raised a hand. "Let her finish." Nayeli held out the badge, then unfolded the paper, Boone's own confession, ripped from his saddlebag during the chaos at the mission. His name, his seal, his orders, proof of the betrayal written in his own hand. "This badge once meant honor," she said softly. "You turned it into a lie. My father's truth dies here unless you hear it." The inspector took the papers, his brow furrowing as he read. The crowd fell silent. Dust drifted in the morning air. Then the inspector looked up, his voice firm. "Deputy Boone, you'll answer for this." Boone's jaw clenched. He saw the crowd turning, the fear, the doubt, the judgment. His hand twitched toward his revolver. "You fools believe her? You believe him?" He took a step back. "You think I'll hang for a half-breed's word and an old man's guilt?" The inspector shouted, "Don't." But Boone moved faster, or thought he did. A single gunshot cracked the silence. The echo rolled off the walls like thunder. Boone froze, eyes wide, before collapsing to the dirt. Mason stood behind him, rifle still smoking, face blank but tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. No one spoke. The wind picked up, scattering bits of paper and ash. Eli removed his hat, looking down at the man who'd stolen his peace for years. "Reckon peace don't come easy," he said quietly. Nayeli's gaze softened. "It never does." The inspector bent to retrieve the fallen badge, then pressed it into her hand. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs where truth still matters." As the sun rose higher, Eli and Nayeli mounted their horses. Mason stayed behind, staring after them as if watching ghosts ride away. The people of Fort Redding watched too, some in shame, some in wonder, as the two figures rode toward the horizon. Far behind them, the storm clouds that had gathered since the night of their meeting broke once more. Rain swept across the plains, washing the dust from the road, the blood from the stones, the lies from the air. And through that curtain of silver rain, the badge gleamed at Nayeli's throat, not as a mark of power but of truth finally set free.